And I've got a button saying start broadcast, Shelby. Do I hit that or not?
You can.
Oh, I have the...
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello,
Hey, we're live.
everybody.
Hey.
Yes.
Everybody stop talking now.
Not a chance. Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, thank you for coming to today's Active Countermeasures webcast with Keith Chu and Bill Stearns. We're going to talk about Are Beacons Evil?
And I'd like to point out we have Hannah joining us today.
Yes, a new face.
On my screen, she's that way.
Yes, over there.
So
Hannah,
welcome, Hannah. We're glad to have you aboard.
Yeah, did you want to give a little quick thing about yourself?
Yeah,
Put you on the spot.
I'm very happy to be here. I work as an intern at Active Countermeasures, which is super awesome because I get to work for a bunch of really cool people. And when I'm not doing that, I am in school or at the rock climbing gym.
I love rock climbing.
Anna,
I
what do you
miss rock
study?
climbing.
Sorry, what'd you say?
What's your major? What classes are you taking?
Computer science.
Oh,
Right now, I am taking a class on compilers and working with GNU Radio for a physics project.
Oh, fantastic. Now I'm jealous. I always wanted to get into that.
I made a key fob reader. It was super exciting.
Yep.
Oh, nice.
Oh, cool.
Very
So
cool.
you're the person I have to wear the aluminum foil hat for.
Can't confirm or deny.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that is cool stuff. Actually, Black Hills did a very cool lab at RSA. Geez, it was last year, actually. It was 2020, February 2020. They had SDR labs and a key fob lab. And so it's really cool stuff. So this is a Bacon's webcast, right?
Bacons, fill me in.
Well, that's what I thought it was. It's Are Bacon's Evil?
Are
I wish
bacons
we could
evil?
do a webcast
Bacons are
around-
definitely evil.
Maple flavored bacon, bacon jerky, chocolate covered
Turkey
bacon.
bacon is like the worst of them all.
I was going to
Turkey
say, I
bacon?
think turkey bacon is evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I taught a couple. Yeah, I taught a couple of classes in Saudi Arabia, which is a country that does not particularly appreciate pork. Let's put it that way. And all the breakfast. Oh, you want bacon? Oh, yeah, we'll get you turkey bacon. That's fine. Yeah, and it's like, maybe not after the first day. It was a nice try, but it's just not the same. Nope. I also had to get a second laptop to take with me because I was dumb enough to get one of the Snort stickers. Snort is the product of SourceFire, the network IDS. And their logo is this giant pig with this massive snout. And I didn't think that was going to go over well. I didn't even think customs would let me in with a stupid thing. So I thought that was better left at home. Hey, let's get over to the main event. If you guys are game,
Awesome.
Keith and I are going to stay on camera for a bit. We'll get Chris and Shelby and Hannah back in a little later. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. We were really pleased to talk a little bit. I'd like to give a special thanks to my co-presenter, Keith. Keith has been kind enough to take some time working on this.
Thank you, Bill.
Of course. We're going to get going into a discussion mostly about beacons. When we talk about beacons, they're largely in the context of malicious traffic going back and forth between an affected machine and a command and control server, but they don't always have to be. So as part of threat hunting, we wanted to talk a little bit about how you recognize the differences between malicious and benign use. As you've been seeing for the past while, please join the Threat Hunter Community Discord if you haven't already. So what we'd like to consider, Keith, were you going to start on this or was this me?
You can go ahead on this one, Bill. I'll catch the next one.
Okay, you got it. Great. So we wanted to look at two particular types of threat traffic. Beacons are regular connections between an affected machine and a command and control server. There are multiple connections per hour, per day. They can be sometimes very fast, once every 5 seconds, and they could be nice and slow to try to sneak under the radar, but they connect at regular intervals. If you have something that is pathologically fast, like more than 5 times a second, we call those strobes, because there's basically no reason for that to exist in the real world. So we're not going to talk too much about strobes today, but those are high-speed beacons. And the second type that's of interest to us today, because you do get a mix of both benign and malicious traffic, are long connections. So long connections are where a single connection is held open for hours or days or perhaps even weeks. So the question is, are all of these malicious? Well, the early version of my slide simply had a single slide that said yes. Any questions? But I was told by Shelby that we needed to pad it out a little bit more. So we're going to pad it out a little bit more.
Yeah. Plus a lot has changed, right? So
Too sure.
Yeah, you might be able to say that 30 years ago, but a lot has changed. So the slide we're looking at now is what does a beacon look like? We all talk about beacons quite often, but this is actually what one looks like if you visualize the traffic. In this case, we're using AC Hunter, which was previously called AI Hunter. And what we're looking at here is we're looking at 24 hours of network traffic. And if you see in the upper middle of the screen, we're looking at communications between two systems. We have the one on the left there, the source, which is our internal host, communicating with an external machine, which is labeled as our destination. And this is in the beacons module of AC Hunter. And myself, as a threat hunter, as an analyst, I'm primarily looking for 3 different parameters to start. And if we look in the green highlighted box there, what that's showing is that's showing the interval of the connections, the timing of the intervals of connections. And as you can see here, it's fairly consistent. We have, looks like from 20 seconds, 27-second intervals up to 31-second intervals. And you can see it's a very tight cluster. So a majority of them are all within the same interval of time. And the other parameter that we key on is if you look at the histogram inside of the red highlighted box, that's showing us the number of connections made per hour. And as you can see along the top, we can almost draw a flat line. They're so consistent. And roughly we're seeing about 120 connections per hour, every hour. This tells us immediately that these are most likely programmed communications. A normal person just using their PC, whether it be for pleasure or work, is not going to be this consistent. You're going to see connections going all over the place. So right away, this is telling us this is a beacon. Does it mean it's evil? It does not. It's just telling us that these are repetitive communications that are on a pretty strict timing interval. And if you could switch to the next slide, Bill. The third parameter that I focus on is also the data size. So how much data is being transferred within these connections? And if you notice in the green highlighted box, the overwhelming majority are all 699 byte payloads. That tells us right away that these communications they may not be the exact same thing, but it's the exact same size. So we can assume that it may be the same instructions over and over. And if we were looking at this as a beacon that correlates to a command and control channel, this is a pretty strong indicator that this may be from the host checking in to the command and control server. Say, for an example, like the host is checking in saying, hey, I'm here. And the command and control server just responding with saying, okay, call me back. I got nothing for you right now. And it just keeps going at a repetitive basis, however that's set up to be timed. And again, it does not necessarily say that it's evil. It's just these are the type of communications that we're witnessing.
Yeah,
and
these are the ones we want to catch. These are the ones we want to catch that may have just been happening on your network for weeks or months or years, and they're just never noticed if you're not looking for them.
Exactly, Bill. And these are an indication these could be potentially malicious communications. And on this screen here, we're looking at Beaker, which is an open tool from ourselves at Active Countermeasures that basically takes in or ingests Sysmon event ID 3s. So say you have a assortment of Windows boxes in your network, you're running Sysmon on those Windows boxes, they can send the Sysmon data to the Beaker server, and Beaker will also visualize that data so you can look through. And in this case, this is the same communications that we were just looking at in AC Hunter. But when we look at it in Beaker, we're able to see the actual process that spawned these communications, which is extremely useful information. That not only see the communications that took place, you can see the process that spawned these communications. And in this case, it was PowerShell that initialized these communications. And it does show us that the user of this machine is Jean-Luc Picard. Again, this does not necessarily say this is an evil communication. However, it does give us a window to look inside of these communications to make the determination. So if Jean-Luc Picard, say, worked in the IT department, it may make sense that communication, maybe he's running some type of script in PowerShell, and this is the type of traffic we see from whatever he's doing. However, if Jean-Luc Picard, say, works in sales, this should raise a red flag. I don't know why anyone in a sales department should be running PowerShell that's making connections to an external resource.
That's exactly it. Well done. Yep.
Yeah. And if we move on to the next one, so it's a beacon. It must be evil. Everybody lock themselves in their house. Oh, wait, we're already doing that.
That's right. Too late.
Just turn off the lights and get under a blanket. It's a beacon. Oh my God. There's no need to, freak out about it or think right away, this is something I got to shut down the machine. What it takes is analyzing and investigating the external resource that you're communicating to, or that's, the communication itself, and just analyze and see, does this make sense for my environment? Should one of my hosts be talking to this resource? And if so, should they be communicating in this fashion? Does it all make sense? So, yeah, basically, we're using our tools to identify these type of communications, but it really takes us as humans to analyze, to look at it, to either classify or make the determination if it's evil or not. So here we have two examples. Again, visualized in AC Hunter. This first beacon, we have researched, and we know this is actually an evil beacon. And if you look at the timing interval graph, you see 4 neat clustered bars of the communication timing. Again, at the lower part of the screen, you see a flat histogram, the same number of connections per hour. And if you go to the next slide, please, Bill, we see actually pretty much the same pattern. And we know that this communication is not evil. However, we still see the same histogram, same number of connections. We see a repetitive timing on the communications. But yet, to determine if it's evil or not takes investigation of the communication. So it's not just matching patterns. It's not just looking at, okay, this is repetitive, so this must be evil. Again, and that's kind of why we're having these discussions, is this is part of the human element to determine what's going on here. So the destination, the source, the type of communications needs to be looked at by us because we know what should be going on in our network. And we know, should this be talking to this? As much as it would be great to automate such a thing, we're not there yet. it really does take us as people looking at this and saying, okay, this destination says it's this. Is it really this? And to verify those type of things. I tend to look at it kind of like autonomous driving. It's got very good, but you still have to sit in the driver's seat. You need to take control when you need to take control. You can't just climb in the back seat, go to sleep, and the car is going to drive you where you need to go. So this is kind of part of that. We need to look at these type of communications. And actually, in this example here, we did research a destination, and it is a Microsoft org. It's a Microsoft ASN, but that's not why it's not evil. We did further research and found out this is actually part of the Microsoft Traffic Manager network. So it's monitoring network traffic. It's doing some forms of load balancing, et cetera. Just looking at it and saying, oh, it's Microsoft. It's not evil. That's not the solution either, because in fact, okay, this is ASN 8075, which also has shared hosting in that environment. So I believe it has some Azure resources, which as soon as we get off this webcast, I could go for a couple bucks, get a server up on Azure, spin it up, and be an evil mastermind. But yet, if somebody looked at it and said, oh, it's ASN's Microsoft, oh, it's fine. That doesn't mean it's fine. They really have to be researched and investigated to determine that. So,
Keith, you'll always be an evil mastermind to me. There we go.
I'm trying.
I know.
And I'm failing.
Keep working at it. Keep working at it.
Yeah.
Excellent points. This isn't something we can automate because you can't have a tool that understands what is allowed in and out of your network. What does your policy say? Can people take part in communications like Skype and GoToMeeting and so on? Many companies, yes. Some companies, no. Some companies, it's a fireable offense. So there isn't a single way to automate this.
Yeah, and good point. And, and some of these come down to policy violations. Like you mentioned, Skype, fairly benign product so far. I mean, I don't believe anybody's used it for C2.
Well, you can use it for transferring files. So,
yes,
being able to shuffle stuff in and out of your network may not be looked on kindly by the policy.
Yeah, well, exactly. So if you, in a normal circumstance, you see Skype, okay, no big deal. But if you worked in a shop that does not want Skype running on a network, they don't want the users to use Skype, then it's an issue.
Exactly right. So what we're focusing on are traffic types that look like threats to start with, but in fact are benign. And again, benign is subjective, as we've just said. There isn't a single definition for that, but you should have a good sense of what's allowed in and out of your network and use that as a starting point for thinking about this. So as we said, we're going to look at beacons and long connections. In many cases, when we find something that is allowed and should be allowed, we can whitelist. And the goal there is to say, look, I've looked at this. We've already investigated this. We've decided that Skype traffic is just fine. We're picking on Skype today. I have no idea why. We've decided Skype traffic is just fine. Let's mark it so we don't have to look at it again tomorrow. And that one act is really the saving grace of this. You don't want to have to do the same research day after day. Let's get the benign stuff out of the way. And it's going to make a big difference for your threat hunting process. The threats that we're talking about probably don't include normal user behavior. As Keith said a little while back, the actions that users take are very sporadic, jumpy, clustered in a short period of time. They don't spread out over all day. They don't have a nice even break every 15 seconds. People will spend, 5 minutes interacting madly with, let's say, Salesforce, and then they won't touch it again for the rest of the day. And that's more the user behavior that we would expect to see. That stuff is going to float down to the bottom of the likelihood graph that something is a beacon or certainly long connections. Let's take a look at some examples. And I'm going to start with NTP because this is the most common one you're going to see as you're working with beacons.
Mhm.
An NTP check-in from a system that's running network time protocol, which keeps your clock updated because the clocks in PCs suck by design almost. Those are, by definition, a beacon. They happen at regular intervals. They're very much the same size every single time. They run all throughout the day, or at least as long as you're connected. They are a beacon. There's no other way to describe them. You can find this out a couple of ways. One is to look at the port that's being used. They almost always happen between port 123 on both ends. It's a regular check-in, and it's a small group of IPs, relatively, that they check into. So if we want to say, don't show this to us anymore, we've got a couple of ways to do that. One is if we can whitelist all the machines under pool.ntp.org, we're going to get most of them in one fell swoop. If you can't do that, you could whitelist individual IP addresses. If your threat hunting software allows you to whitelist anything that's using the NTP protocol, you could use that approach. And as a last resort, you could use UDP port 123 and say, if the communications between port 123 on both ends, we could use that as a way to get rid of this. As we go through this section, under whitelisting, very nice, Noopy, well done. As we go through this section under whitelist, what I'm going to try to do are list the best ways to do this whitelisting first and then work your way down. So if the tool that you're using doesn't have one of the abilities I mentioned, keep going down until you find one that does, one of the approaches that does.
One thing I was just thinking of also, because you were talking about basically whitelisting port 123 on the firewall, which is actually would take care of pretty much all of that, which I believe is a good thing to do. I was just thinking the other thing you could do as well is also monitor the data size being transferred through there. So in other words, if, because not much data is being transferred just to update, to synchronize clocks. So you can almost set a threshold to, if you see more than this size of data, okay, let me know. Something may be going on funny there. So this is just an example of an NTP beacon. This is just a system that's synchronizing its clock on a regular basis. Again, when you do visualize it, you can see the similarities of, the source, the destination, the timing of the connections. You can see on the bottom histogram that per hour is fairly consistent between 1 and 2 connections per hour. And most times, I say most times because it's hard to put hard and fast rules on everything, but most times when you're looking at a 24-hour chunk of data, NTP is normally going to show between 120 and 140 connections within that 24-hour period. So you can kind of narrow it down to that window as well. So if you have something that's checking in on NTP and making 5,000 connections in a 24-hour period, that's something to be investigated.
Anything look odd about this? Go ahead, Keith. If you saw this on your screen and this was the first thing you saw, what would your eyes be drawn to right off?
Well, my eyes are drawn to the country, and that's pretty much why I just showed this as an example. Because I know myself, when I first started getting into threat hunting and so forth, I see something like this and I'm like, oh no, Bulgaria, they're infiltrating our system. However, I quickly learned that NTP servers are everywhere across the world. So I just wanted to kind of show this as an example that just because you see something like this, it doesn't mean, oh my God, we've been hacked, it's evil. No, again, it just takes investigation by looking at the IP, maybe checking out, online tools. Something like Shodan is very good because it'll show you the resources on that external server, which in this case, it does show that it's open on port 123, and it is set up through ntp.org to be a valid time server.
Bingo. Exactly right. NTP in particular would like to have your client computers communicating with a host that is relatively close in the network sense. And that commonly overlaps with a host that's relatively close geographically. So if you happen to be in Bulgaria, you would want to be synchronizing with a time server in Bulgaria as a general rule, so that the time back and forth between the client and the server is both small and reliable. It doesn't change a lot. That distance, the timing, obviously NTP really cares about that. So this is why you have time servers all over the world. On this, we've got examples of different host names. If you notice, a couple of these have host names that are kind of internal, but as you get closer in time, no, actually back here, what you'll see is that many of these are under pool.ntp.org. So we have multiple host names available for this one machine. The nice part is that pool.ntp.org is a subdomain of ntp.org that is designed to hold a lot of these hosts, including customized ones for a particular vendor. You can see .us.pool.ntp.org or .es for Spain or .uk for England. But basically, anything under pool.ntp.org is a good candidate for being a time server.
Like we keep saying, it really comes down to investigating the traffic. Just don't take it at face value.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, don't, oh, it's Microsoft. Oh, it's fine.
No. The second kind is VPN traffic, and this will show up quite regularly if you have approved VPN endpoints in your organization and you're watching the network segment, of course, that has that VPN traffic. VPNs should raise a little bit of a flag for anybody, because when you've got this traffic between two endpoints, we may not be using, what goes through that VPN may not be what you intended. I'll get back to that in just a minute. These could show up as beacons, strobes, or long connections, depending on how the particular software works. Common ports to be used, 1194 UDP for OpenVPN, Protocol 50 and UDP 500 for IPsec, 22 TCP for SSH, and 4501 UDP and 443 TCP for Global Protect. Plenty more, and they largely use their own ports and protocols. Anything that uses IPsec is likely to use protocols 50 and 51. 500 is very common for the initial negotiation between the two endpoints to say, hey, are you who you say you are, and what encryption protocols can we use together? So when you're looking at whitelist traffic, assuming that it's allowed at all, you could whitelist by the IP addresses of the two VPN endpoints. You could whitelist by the protocol if your software allows that. You could have specific ports involved and the protocols involved as well. But the real warning here is if you do allow VPN traffic in and out of any kind, keep in mind that you're just watching the outer shell. You can see what ports are being used to communicate internal to external or external to internal, but you can't see what's going on inside. And so if you get somebody who's determined to send out huge blocks of code that shouldn't be going outside your building, and there's a VPN available, then you'll never be able to see that unless you terminate it, inspect every packet, and then resend it on, and that's more than a little bit tricky. For some reasons, this is why some organizations say we're just not going to allow VPN traffic in and out, or we're going to do it on a very limited basis under very controlled circumstances. Another one to keep an eye out for are operating systems and applications that are simply checking to see if there's a new version available. So anywhere from maybe perhaps once every hour or two up to maybe once a day, could be as little as once a week. They'll go out to their main site, say, hey, what's the newest version of the software? Do I have a new version that needs to be installed? And in some cases, automatically pull that software down and either queue it up or actually install it right all in one nice continuous process. This is commonly done over port 443 TCP. The biggest cue that this is happening is the host name to which you're connecting. So if I have Ubuntu Linux computers that are going out and checking, say, hey, do you have any new packages for me to install on top of the ones I've already got here? They will commonly be going out to a host whose host name ends in ubuntu.org. So that's one of the quickest ways to tell that. So you may want to whitelist by the fully qualified domain name, or FQDN, or in some cases, the domain itself, like ubuntu.org. If you can't do that, the autonomous system number, the group of machines that are all under control of one organization, would be a very good fallback, because then you can kind of treat those with similar trust. Microsoft's ASN 8075 being an unfortunate exception to that statement. And finally, if none of those are available, you could whitelist by IP address. And that is absolutely better than nothing. I can say, if any of my hosts are connecting out to 6.7.8.9, and I know that that's an Ubuntu patch server, and I've got tons of Ubuntu machines, great. Let's just whitelist connections out to that host, and we're going to treat anything going there as probably just fine.
Yeah, and I'd like to add something to that as well, Bill, is also when classifying this kind of traffic is to know your domains. So don't just assume because it has a familiar name in the domain that it's actually owned by that company. And actually, I can give you a good example is let's say you run a shop that's using a lot of Cisco products, a lot of Cisco appliances. You're going to see a lot of traffic. Some is going to show as beacons for just monitoring the network, or updating the routers and so forth. And it may have something like Cisco in the URL, like cisco.com. And just to provide a little bit of an example is recently I purchased a domain for myself just for use in adversary simulations and so forth. And the domain I bought was ciscoupdate.com. So I believe that a lot of people would see that, and if you worked in a Cisco shop and say, oh, well, that's just, it's our Cisco appliances reaching out. But yet, if you would research the actual domain name itself, you would find it has nothing to do with Cisco. Obviously, I am not Cisco. I don't own Cisco, but yet I own the domain. So again, investigate, verify.
Absolutely true. Lookalike domains, typo squatted domains, FACEBOK.com. I'm sure somebody's got that. And please keep an eye out for typo squats and people taking lookalike domains, 100%. That's more of a sign of maliciousness than anything else.
Absolutely.
Another possibility are routers that are talking to each other and exchanging traffic on what routes they have available to them. This is called Border Gateway Protocol, or BGP. This traffic happens on port 179 TCP. Many of you won't ever see this simply because you're not looking at the networks between routers. And so this may never show up for you as you're doing threat hunting, and that's just fine. Or your routers simply don't use that approach. If you do need to filter this out, you could do it by router IP pairs, by the BGP protocol, if your software knows how to identify that. And as a worst case, you could whitelist port 179 TCP. A similar one is SQL Server replication. This shows up when you have a master and slave. I apologize for the use of the word. I don't know if there's a better term in the SQL community, so apologies. We'll call it primary and secondary. How about that? Great. So if I have traffic between a primary SQL server and maybe 4 or 5 read-only SQL secondaries, you will find that there are long connections held between the primaries and the secondaries. Some example ports are down there. The port that your SQL software uses may differ. So we encourage you to use IP pairs to whitelist these, because you don't have a trust relationship between every machine in your building and every machine out in the internet. You have a trust relationship between specific pairs of machines, each secondary and its associated primary as a general rule. So that would be the best choice for whitelisting it. Good fallbacks are by protocol, if somebody knows MySQL or PostgreSQL, and finally by the port numbers like the ones that we show above. Network monitoring tools fall in a class all by themselves, because if I've got a system that is there to check, is my web server up? Is it responding to static queries? Is it responding to dynamic queries? Is my IRC server up? Is my primary database working? Are we able to do all these things? Monitoring tools like that are going to make very regular and perhaps even somewhat high-speed connections every minute, every 30 seconds, every 15 seconds. How long can my web server be down before I have to know about it is the answer to that question. These connections are going to look exactly like beacons. They are beacons. They are regular check-ins from one machine to another. So we have to be able to say, look, we can't limit this by port because these are going to be checking a whole range of ports and making sure everybody's live, everybody's up and running. But we can whitelist the source IP of these connections. So we go back to the IP address of the network monitoring system and we whitelist that. There's a danger there. You have to make sure that that particular system is really well locked down, because you've suddenly said to your threat hunting system, look, I don't care what this machine does. It can do anything it wants. And if somebody manages to break into that box, they suddenly you have no visibility to what happens next. So make sure that system is really, really well locked down before you try this. Worst case, by IP pairs. Monitoring system to our web server, monitoring system to our primary SQL server, monitoring system to our fill in the blank. You could do those pairs as well.
You know, Bill, that just made me think of if you're like in an enterprise environment, that whitelist auditing is probably a good practice to have. Now, what interval of time that is, I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but say, for an example, every 6 months, you go back and verify items on your whitelist and make sure that they have not changed.
Yes.
Because as
Or that
we know,
people haven't added something that's just way too general.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or that IP may not be owned by the same resource that it was.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, and I know that it's a difficult operation and it might be kind of a pain in the backside, but I believe it has to be done.
Agreed. This is probably a good thing for a quarterly audit to add it as one of the checklist items that needs to be performed once a quarter, and having it done by somebody other than the team that's doing the threat hunting. We also encourage, whenever somebody adds a whitelist entry, add a comment with your initials, the date, and the reason why. And that makes the job easier for the auditor, because then they know, hey, this doesn't make sense. Who do I talk to? Aha, here's that person's initials. I'm going to go chat with them.
That is an excellent point, Bill. Because even myself, I've whitelisted things that, you know, I knew at the moment and, you know, was very interested in the moment. And I go back and look at it months later and I can't remember why I did it, you know, so I basically have to start the whole process over again. So that's an excellent point. Keep notes.
Even when you add it, exactly right. The biggest oxymoron in the computer security industry is a temporary firewall rule. It does not exist. It is not possible for it to exist. Once something goes in there, it goes in there until the machine dies.
Yeah.
We've got another one, and this is a general category for remote access applications. And this is where any outside system might be able to come in, connect, get control of your desktop, run applications. This is commonly used legitimately for tech support. Companies are being very sensitive to the fact that this is a bit of a security risk. And so they usually say, hey, is it okay if we come in and do tech support on this? But remote access applications in general, those are a big security risk. Do we have a section coming up here on TeamViewer? I think we do, don't we, Keith?
No. No,
No,
I
okay.
believe that slide pretty much, I mean, that covers an application like TeamViewer.
Perfect. That's one example of it.
Yeah.
So the biggest question is, do we allow this? Are there certain times of day when it is allowed? Are there certain IP addresses that are allowed to come in? Do we have restrictions on how somebody has to authenticate before they can get in? There are a lot of security issues around this, but as a general rule, if you allow this and it's done in a secure way, this is a benign piece of traffic. If you allow this and it's not done in a secure way, it suddenly switches over to malicious. So start with your policy. Do you allow this at all? That should be the first place that you check. 443 TCP is a tough one to analyze because this is used in so many contexts for so many different types of traffic. You can't really tell just by the port number whether this is being used maliciously or in a nice approved way. So you'll see this for long connections. You'll see this for Microsoft traffic. You'll see this for web server downloads, obviously encrypted. And because in many cases the traffic is going to be encrypted, there just isn't an opportunity to tell whether the content that's being sent or received is approved. So if you're going to whitelist this, you could consider doing it by the top level domain of the service to whom you're connecting. You could try using a particular ASN. A better choice, because of what we've said about ASN 8075, is probably to use a particular subnet and say, if I'm connecting out to this block of 256 or 65,000 IP addresses, that's approved, but I'm just not going to allow it everywhere. It's a tough one to analyze. I'm going to just say right off the bat.
Mhm.
Chat and voice over IP apps, there are a ton of them, and they tend to all kind of blend into each other with the features that they offer. Text-based chat, voice-based chat, video chat, file transfer, send money over whatever. Sometimes it's just to one organization. Sometimes it's peer-to-peer.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, and a lot of times, even when they're not being used, they're very noisy.
Yes, very regular check-ins. Hi, I'm still here. Available for a call. Available for a call. And you'll see them as beacons in that sense, or there'll be long connections heading out. I would maybe just give a general sense that, first of all, figure out which ones are allowed in your environment. Some may be, some may not. Once you've found that out from your policies, then you can whitelist by the fully qualified domain name or domain to which they connect, by the ASN of the organization that runs them, by the destination IP. And keep in mind, too, that you may have an environment where a small number of machines are allowed to use these services, but not all machines. And so in that case, it would be better to whitelist by IP pair. This internal system talking to this outside server. This internal system talking to this outside server. This internal system talking to this outside server. And have individual rules for those pairs instead of a blanket rule that says everybody can use Skype.
Yep.
You have to know your policy first.
Yeah, it's like, why is our credit card processing server using Google Meet?
That's right. Damn, that happened on Tuesday. Why is it going out again?
Yeah.
I hate it when that happens. Advertising traffic. We've got a couple of, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, again, something that's very noisy on the network. There's just a lot of it. I believe we all know that nowadays. And some of it actually, unfortunately, can be used for a malicious nature. So
Yeah. Someone can send over a piece of malware instead of a GIF or an MPEG, a movie, MPEG movie.
Mhm.
So handling this, it's a tricky one because there are so many services, because you can't simply block them all. I'm tending to think that what we think of as an ad blocking plugin to the browsers is probably the most effective approach. And I say that because these are people who spend time thinking about what are the domains, what can we block, what can we safely block without screwing other things up. I actually don't use one. I use a slightly different approach called Privacy Badger, and I believe this is available for Firefox and Chrome. Instead of having a fixed list of domains that are verboten and a fixed list of domain, everything else is fine, These Privacy Badger tracks when you have data being transferred between two different services through cookies. And it can block cookies. It can totally block all downloads from a domain. It tends to do a very good job for me, but to each their own. What happens if you're not sure? There's going to be a massive gray area in the middle of the whitelist stuff that you know is good and the blacklist stuff you know is bad. What do you do for the stuff in the middle? Sit down and think about each of these aspects. What's the port being used? And do I recognize the protocol being used on that port? They don't always match. Do I know the name of the host that my client was trying to connect to, and what IP address is that, and what ASN is that sitting in? An autonomous system number is not the answer to everything that is security and identity related. But an ASN is very nice in saying, look, I've got this block of machines that are, in most cases, all under the control of one organization. So as a general rule, I either trust that organization or I don't, but it's a nice way to group things together. What should the source system be doing? If it is just a little, as Keith said, our credit card processing machine, yes, it's able to connect out to its credit card processor, and I can see that traffic all day long. Why is it connecting to Google Meet? Well, that might be worth tracking down. Once you know what your systems can do, this becomes a much easier task. So having any type of inventory system, even if it's nothing more than a text file with IP addresses and what those systems do, that's better than nothing. Have some.
Yeah. Is there a legitimate use for what I'm seeing?
That should be the first question. Exactly right. If it's not explicitly blocked, is there at least a legitimate reason for this traffic to happen? Good call. Does our policy allow it? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. Knowing that you've got some Ubuntu Linux systems and you've got some Ubuntu patch servers that can talk to each other, that's great. Having some Windows systems that can talk to some Windows patch servers, that's also great. Having some OS2 systems connecting out to hosts that we've never seen before, that's not so great. And can you tell what application actually generated this traffic? We love Beaker because it makes that task really, really simple. If I may just harken back to your slide, Keith, knowing that something named PowerShell is connecting out to a particular host, when I don't know of any legitimate reason why somebody's running PowerShell, that makes this process so much faster.
It really does. Yeah, and in fact, I believe the next slide shows another screenshot of Beaker, but it shows some more of the information, because I think the first slide was just showing you the top, but you can glean quite a bit of information from the sysmon data. So It shows you, the time and the different processes that happen.
And in fact, even just knowing what the machine advertises itself as for a host name could tell you quite a bit about where this is likely located. Somebody could lie about it, fair enough, but it's a good starting point saying, oh, this is a desktop over in our ACM 01 division, and it's in row 10. Well, that's going to save me a lot of time when I have to go and track down the individual person with a Nerf gun. Yep, and it will happen, trust me.
Yeah, and that's another great point, Bill. If it doesn't match your corporate naming convention, that's a red flag right away.
Bingo. Well done.
Now, sure enough, somebody set up the system, maybe didn't do it right or anything. There could be, an actual reason why it's not named with the same convention, but it's another indicator that, you need to look closer.
There may be a legitimate reason. I'm still going over there with a Nerf gun.
Yeah.
So maybe one of the kind of wrap-up topics, we're getting a little close to the end, is how do you whitelist? I would really encourage you to see what your tool can do, because this makes the difference between a really frustrating process you have to go through every single day and a process you go through once and you clean out a huge bunch of traffic, and then you clean out some more the next day, and you clean out some more the next day, and every day that list of potential traffic types keeps shrinking because you've whitelisted so much the previous days. It makes all the difference in the world.
Agreed.
Rita,
baseline. Basically, you baseline the whole network. So
Eventually,
everything I expect and everything's good. Anything that rises above that needs to be investigated.
bingo. If you've got a good sense of what your network can do, that's wonderful. And the nice part is you can do this bit by bit. You don't have to totally map out the entire network on day one. What you've got, though, is going to make it much easier later. Our open source threat hunting tool, Rita, does not have whitelisting built in, but the nice part is the output is text. And so if you want to do some whitelisting with that, you can actually use a tool called grep. And I've got a blog post that I'll show you a little bit later that has some ideas of how to do this. It's a little bit manual, but it's absolutely better than nothing in terms of human time. I'd much rather have some wasted CPU cycles by running grep than some wasted human cycles, because I have to do the same thing I did yesterday. With a firewall, I can absolutely put in blocks, for example, by source and destination IP or subnet or port. And depending on what firewall software you're using, you may even be able to put in allow or block lists based on the logged in user or host name. Not all firewalls will do this, but it's a good starting point. AC Hunter, our threat hunting commercial software, can whitelist by source and destination IP, by ASN, by subnet, by IP pair. And I don't know if we're going to get in trouble for this, Keith, but I figure it's easier to ask for forgiveness later than for permission. We have a new upcoming feature. So while I've been talking today about the ability to whitelist by fully qualified domain name or host name, if you look in the current version 5.0.1, you can't do that in AC Hunter. I will let you know that may be changing in the very near future.
I'm
And
so looking
apologies.
forward to that.
That's right. Trust me, we are all looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So this is one of those examples of where it's really helpful if you pull down the PDF, and if you haven't already got it, it's in the handout section of GoToWebinar. These links, so you can click right inside the PDF. If you feel like typing them in, it's good with me. So in our threat hunting false positives blog, there's a section on whitelisting in Rita, as well as whitelisting in other tools as well. If you want to take a look at suspicious traffic found, what are the next steps? We've got a much richer set of details on how to investigate. What are you looking up? What should you track? If you don't already have a ticketing system for handling incidents, it's really worth getting into using that as a regular habit. One, it keeps all of your information about a particular traffic type together. Two, you can search back and say, did I ever investigate port 3306? I'm sure that sounds familiar. And then sure enough, 5 tickets come up where you've done this investigation. You said, yeah, we're still not sure if people are supposed to be running MySQL. But oh yeah, let's go and get a final answer from the IT guys of whether this is approved or not. Get into a ticketing system if you aren't already there. And Keith, last entry.
Actually, I like that point because a lot of it too is like information sharing, which is kind of what we're doing here. Because again, since this is a human process, that we all need to share this kind of information, like what you were just talking about in one specific environment. Let's say that, John spent 2 hours researching this one destination and found all this information, but yet, Rick over here is doing the same thing tomorrow and has no idea what John did yesterday. So that's a good point you made is share the information or have a centralized place where this information is. That way you're not repeating the same work over and over.
Bingo. If you happen to leave for whatever reason, or you're just not available because, hey, you're on vacation for a week, can your coworkers get access to your notes in an easy way? A ticketing system's great for that. The last URL on the slide, Keith?
Oh, that was a blog post, part of the Malware of the Day series. And this was kind of spurred on by the I guess you could say attack, but the breach of a water department in Florida that used TeamViewer as an attack vector to get into their network. which I believe was purely a password crack, either a very weak password or shared passwords. But it still just brings to light that, if you're using remote access software like TeamViewer to remote into systems, that it's not just, set it and forget it. Well, password security, obviously, that was a big failure in this case. But beyond that, you got to keep an eye on this stuff. It's kind of like the slide you had earlier. Is there's even a few simple parameters you can use to look at this. Is if you're in a shop that the office is only open from 9 to 5, and you got TeamViewer usage at 3 a.m. Yeah, it could be something funny going on there. I mean,
something funny going on there, and nobody's going to see it.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's TeamViewer, we use it, it's fine. And then again, it doesn't always mean it's evil. It could be one of the employees who woke up in the middle of the night and said, "Oh, I got this great idea. I better, whatever. I got to get into my system and do it now." I mean, which is fine. But again, investigate. And that way, okay, it's okay.
Bingo. Exactly right. So we got a couple of references to the software we've talked about during the webcast. AC Hunter is commercial, as we mentioned. Beaker is open source. You can use this totally independent of any of the other tools that we've talked about or in conjunction with them. And Rita is our open source threat hunting tool. What we've talked about today applies to any threat hunting approach. Anything that works with beacons and long connections can use the information we've talked about today. It's not specific to our tools. Hey, many thanks to my colleague Keith for taking the time to do the presentation with me. In the background, we've got Hannah, Chris, and Ryan, and Shelby for setting up the presentation. Guys, you're welcome to come back on if you want, because I'd love to hear if there have been any questions that we haven't covered. And if you've got some things that have gone by in Discord as we've been talking way too loud and way too long. Anything to bring up?
All right, yeah, I do have a couple of questions. Andrew asked, does AI Hunter integrate into XDR? And he referenced secureworks.com.
I don't know. I've never tried setting those two up together.
No, me either. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, we're going to have to claim ignorance on that one. It's so easy to do, I found.
Well,
all right.
And I haven't looked at the specific configuration, but AC Hunter is set up to send out alerts, which it can send alerts to a lot of different platforms. So I don't know if that would be useful for him to tie those together or not.
Sounds good. Sorry, Andrew.
All right. Shamil asked, should we have a beacon installed on every segment of the network?
Oh, lovely. May I take that one, Keith?
Go for it.
Great. So you really, yes, the answer is yes. And you should be watching every network segment that has traffic going from the inside, your internal network, to the outside or back. So the easiest approach is just to go behind the main router or firewall that leads out to the internet, and that way you get everything. If the amount of traffic flowing through that box is so much that you can't put a sensor there and keep up with the flow, then yes, you need to back down a little further into your network and put sensors at multiple points, monitor them individually. The nice part is that the whitelisting you do when you work with one sensor will now apply to the other sensors. So it isn't that you've made your work 8 times harder by having 8 sensors. You've made it about 4.5 times harder. Somewhere in there.
Yeah. And actually, I'd like to expand on like what you said, Bill, because that was a great point. Is when looking at this type of traffic, looking for beacons, we want to look at the traffic from internal to external and external to internal. You don't want to look at what east-west traffic, like internal to internal. You're going to see just a lot of noise, and I don't believe it's going to be very useful to you.
It won't teach you about what's trying to communicate with the outside world, and that's primarily what we focus on with threat hunting.
All right, got another question. Mustafa says, in a situation where the C2 server patch or build server has been compromised, just like SolarWind, how do you use beaconing identification to detect that? And wouldn't whitelisting make you blind to when a huge traffic has been transmitted between these?
Whitelisting will absolutely make you blind to traffic that matches that whitelisting pattern. And this is one of the reasons why we encourage you to think about different approaches to whitelisting. Remember, many of these had 2 or 3 different options that you could take, and we start off with saying, do this with IP pairs, and then go by protocol and work your way down. Simply whitelisting a host and saying that host will never do me wrong is not a good call. But we do suggest that you use more specific whitelisting techniques like IP pairs or protocols or ASNs or in some cases ports, because that's a more defensible way to limit yourself to just the quote unquote good stuff, as opposed to saying, hey, that box out on the internet, it could never get whacked. It could never have malware on it. It could never do me wrong. Keith, any thoughts?
No, I was just over here shaking my head in total agreement, because you know, you're absolutely right. And that's, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. That's the beauty and the pain of whitelisting. The beauty is you get a lot of the traffic out of your face that you don't really need to be looking at, and sometimes that can come around and bite you. And it kind of goes. I mean, some of it could be, whitelist auditing by verifying those, but in this specific example, like the SolarWinds attack, at that point, it almost comes down to the type of tools that you're using in your environment. So, in other words, if you were to whitelist, let's just, for example, say SolarWinds.com, and you whitelist that where you're not going to see any beacons going to SolarWinds. However, if you're also using a tool that looks at DNS and DNS records, you might have caught that specific attack by DNS because they were using a lot of generated subdomains. And like AC Hunter would have saw that in the DNS module, because that's also something we look at, is we look at any host names that have an extraordinary amount of subdomains associated with them, and show you to look at that. So
Agreed.
It's a tough thing. When you whitelist something, say like Intel, you trust Intel, so you whitelist Intel, and then Intel gets whacked. I mean, it's tough. I don't know if there's an absolute solution to that.
There isn't. Now, on one of the blogs, just to wrap it up, Chris, sorry, is just a quick note saying, if I whitelist this, is there any chance that this will blind me to other malicious traffic? So take a look at those blogs if this topic interests you, and I hope it does.
All right, I got a couple more. Let's try to get them in. All right, Daniel Kirby asked, in Rita/AC Hunter, will it in the future support matching different type of beaconing traffic from samples towards captured traffic? How does the future look like to get the tools smarter?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
So I'm not sure I do either, but let me give a couple of tries based on the wording. Can you do threat hunting on captured traffic? So yes, you could have what is called a PCAP file, which are packets that would normally be seen on the network. They're just saved to a long file, and you can do threat hunting on a raw PCAP file. So this is especially in an environment where you may have captures from a long time ago when you want to go back on a particular day and say, did we miss something that day? Yes, you can do that. Can you do threat hunting on samples? And I'm not sure of the wording, but I'm wondering if that means, could you have a piece of sample malware, run it in a controlled lab, and do analysis on that? Of course, absolutely. So in fact, Keith is the master of this. Our Malware of the Day series.
Well, Master's taking it a bit far, but thank you. But yes, I can't speak for a lot of other tools. I can speak for our tools like Rita and AC Hunter. Rita being open source and free, you can run that today. Or AC Hunter, both of them, you can. They're designed basically to ingest Zeek logs or NetFlow data, but you can also import PCAPs, whether it be a 1 hour, 24 hour, whether it was 5 years ago, it was yesterday. You can import them in there and do full beacon analysis and all the other different fun things we can do.
Okay, got Andrew. Follow-up question regarding the XDR. It says, thanks. Does AI Hunter offer a custom API? In that case, perhaps that I can try and integrate with XDR.
Not at the moment. And I apologize for that statement. We have some internal URLs that we use for communication between modules. They are not firmed up, documented, tested individual API calls that we could advertise and say, here, this is where you need to go and grab your stuff. However, if you want to chat at some point and say, hey, I've got just a small amount of data I need to pull out of here, can you help me out with the format? Get back in touch with us on Rita development. I think would probably be the best place for that. We can have a conversation about that later. Absolutely.
Awesome.
I apologize. Real quick, Casey, I know we're getting to 3:05. If you've got other meetings you need to get to.
No, I
please.
just got one more.
Okay, great.
One more question, real quick one. Daniel Kirby asks, what ticket system do you use or recommend?
I don't have one. This is any ticketing system that you want is just fine. One nice thing that we remember, I'm not actively watching networks. I'm developing the software that watches networks. I will just point out, though, that it is really helpful if the ticketing system you choose has the ability to create a ticket based on a URL with the IP address somewhere in that URL. And the reason I say that is that in that case, you can modify AC Hunter's drop-down menu next to the IP addresses and say, add this new entry in, and when someone clicks on it, send me over to the ticketing system to create a new entry with that URL in the title. So it's really simple to take a particular piece of suspect traffic, do one click, and create a new ticket for it right off the bat. It makes it a very fluid process. Hey, real thank you to everybody who's taken part today. I know we've run over.
Shelby had something. Sorry.
Oh, Shelby, apologies.
Yes.
All yours.
It's okay. I did just want to mention, because I've seen us get a lot of questions in about AI Hunter, or AC Hunter rather, which used to be called AI Hunter. And the questions have revolved around price and a lot of other different things. But if anybody would like to learn more about AI Hunter, you can actually have a personal demo. Chris Brenton, he's the COO of Active Countermeasures. If you'd like a demo for AC Hunter, you can type the words demo either into the GoToWebinar chat or inside of the chat for Discord, and we'll have most likely Casey. We'll get back to you about setting up a demo for that.
We would love to show you the process. Getting going with Rita is a great way to go. We actually worked on AC Hunter as a way to make the process more fluid. We want you to spend less time on the individual gears of doing threat hunting. And so the AC Hunter work came out of how do we make this easy and how do we make this so that a junior analyst can do this very simply.
Oh yeah, I am not a tech person at all, and I can even get into AI Hunter, or AC Hunter rather, and use it and actually know what I'm doing. So it's definitely something help desk people can use. It's definitely super user friendly. So if you'd like to learn more, go ahead and type demo in either one of the chats and we'll reach out to you.
I'd just like to mention for anyone that doesn't know, Rita is the engine. So even AC Hunter is using Rita as the analytics part of it. So
we just
Rita's
make it
awesome.
look really awesome. There we go.
Yeah, well, it is actually very good.
Hey, let's wrap this up just so that people can actually get on to the rest of their work days. Thank you all for taking the time today. We love having you here. We hope you'll join us on our next webcast. Please check up on the event schedule, and also Black Hills has regular webcasts coming up. And we hope to see you in person at Wild West Hacking Fest Way West in June.
And again, thank you everybody for joining us today, and we will see you in the next one.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.